HOA, follow my rules and these trash cans should be on their place. Everyone forget the storm, do cleaning first.
Dark clouds rolled in fast, the kind that turn the afternoon sky an ugly green and make your stomach drop before the phone alert even buzzes. Within seconds, weather apps lit up with a tornado warning for the area, not a watch, the real deal. Sirens started wailing across the neighborhood, long and urgent, echoing off rooftops and fences. That sound flipped the switch for everyone paying attention. This wasn't theoretical anymore. Residents reacted immediately. Garage doors rattled shut. People hustled kids and pets inside, shoes forgotten, nerves buzzing. Some neighbors headed for basements, others ducked into interior bathrooms, and a few moved toward the reinforced common area shelter near the clubhouse. There was no panic, but there was speed. Everyone understood the drill, and no one was waiting around to argue about it. Except Karen. While most people were getting to cover, Karen stepped outside wearing a rain jacket with an HOA logo stitched on the chest, clipboard tucked under one arm like it was just another Tuesday. The sirens didn't slow her down. She started walking the street, glancing at driveways and front yards, eyes locked on details nobody else cared about anymore. Trash bins left out. A car parked crooked. A patio chair tipped over by the wind. A neighbor yelled from a doorway that there was an active tornado warning and she needed to get inside. Karen waved it off, shouting back that she was documenting violations before things got worse. That was the first clear power shift. The moment emergency behavior met HOA mindset, the clash was obvious. One system was about survival. The other was about control. Rain started spitting sideways, sharp and cold. Tree branches bent hard enough to creak. Karen kept walking, scribbling notes, occasionally stopping to take photos with her phone. Each step she took outside while sirens screamed made the situation heavier. This wasn't just bad judgment anymore. It was defiance of common sense. Minutes later, the neighborhood alert system sent another notification urging everyone to shelter immediately. Phones buzzed again inside darkened houses. Karen's phone buzzed too. She glanced at it, dismissed it, and kept moving. She said later she thought alerts were exaggerated. At the time it just looked reckless. The location shifted when she reached the common area shelter entrance. A small group of residents had gathered there, ushering people inside. The shelter door was open, wind whipping rain across the concrete. Karen stopped near the entrance and started telling people they couldn't bring bikes, strollers, or loose items inside because of HOA rules about common space clutter. That was the moment the tension spiked. A resident snapped back that emergency rules override HOA policies. Karen replied that order still mattered during emergencies, saying that while sirens blared was wild. Someone pulled out a phone and started recording, hands shaking slightly, not for drama but documentation. Another person told Karen she was risking lives by slowing things down. Thunder cracked loud enough to rattle windows. The air pressure dropped. Karen raised her voice, insisting she was acting in the community's best interest. The irony hung thick. People were trying to get out of danger and she was worried about appearances. At that point, someone called 911, reporting an HOA board member interfering with access to shelter during a tornado warning. That call changed everything. The situation jumped from neighborhood conflict to emergency response in seconds. You don't mess around when someone blocks safety measures during severe weather. Police and emergency management were dispatched immediately. No waiting, no debate. Karen was still outside when the first patrol car rolled in, lights flashing through sheets of rain. An officer stepped out, rain soaking his uniform, and told her to move inside now. Karen started to explain her role. The officer cut her off and said this was an emergency zone, not an HOA meeting. That sentence ended the discussion. Authority snapped into place. Karen finally stepped aside, face tight, clipboard dripping wet. Residents moved quickly into the shelter, doors closing behind them as the wind howled louder. The storm raged on, but the obstruction was gone. In less than 10 minutes, everything had escalated from sirens to enforcement. That's how real authority works. When danger shows up, the rules are simple and the wrong ones get tossed out fast. The first challenge came fast and loud, cutting through the sirens like a reality check Karen clearly didn't want. A resident stepped out of a front door, rain already soaking the porch, and shouted that there was an active tornado warning. Not a drill, not a watch, but a warning, the kind that means get inside now. He pointed at the sky, dark and spinning looking, and then at his phone where the alert was flashing red. That was the moment someone directly confronted her authority. Karen barely paused. She turned, clipboard still in hand, and said she was aware of the weather situation. Her tone was dismissive, like she was talking about light rain, not a funnel cloud risk. She claimed HOA rules still applied during temporary emergencies, and that maintaining order was especially important when things got chaotic. That sentence landed wrong immediately. Temporary emergencies isn't a phrase people use when sirens are screaming. The resident stared at her, clearly stunned. He took a step closer, raising his voice over the wind, and told her emergency instructions override HOA authority every single time. He wasn't yelling out of anger. He was yelling because the storm was loud and the situation was serious. That distinction mattered. This wasn't drama. This was urgency. Karen shook her head and said rules don't just disappear because people panic. She actually used the word panic, which flipped the dynamic again. Now she wasn't just wrong. She was minimizing a real threat. Another neighbor leaned out of a garage and backed the first guy up, saying emergency management trumps HOA bylaws, no exceptions. That was the second voice, and it mattered because it showed Karen wasn't dealing with one disgruntled resident. She was being corrected by the community. Rain picked up hard, blowing sideways, stinging exposed skin. A trash can rolled down the street, clattering into a curb. Karen had to raise her voice to be heard now, and she doubled down, saying she'd been instructed to enforce standards regardless of circumstances. That claim was vague on purpose and everyone noticed. A woman holding a toddler yelled that this wasn't the time for clipboard nonsense. Karen responded that families still needed to follow guidelines. That exchange pushed things from disagreement into outrage. People weren't just confused anymore. They were mad. The power balance shifted again as emotion entered the scene, not from Karen, but from residents who felt blocked. The location shifted slightly as more people clustered near the common area shelter entrance. The wind funneled through the space, making it harder to hear, harder to move. Karen stood near the path, still talking, still gesturing, still acting like this was a compliance issue instead of a safety crisis. That physical positioning mattered. She wasn't just saying things. She was in the way. Another neighbor stepped up and told her flat out that if she didn't move, someone was calling emergency services. Karen scoffed and said there was no need to involve outsiders. That word, outsiders, was a mistake. It framed emergency responders as less legitimate than an HOA board member, and that flipped the authority conversation completely. Phones came out. Not for clout, but for proof. People started recording because they could feel how sideways this had gone. Karen noticed and accused them of harassment. That accusation didn't slow anyone down. If anything, it sped things up. The first resident who challenged her pulled out his phone and dialed 911. He didn't announce it. He didn't threaten it. He just did it. That action changed the escalation level instantly. Once emergency services are contacted during a tornado warning, everything moves on a different track. Karen finally hesitated, looking around like she expected backup that wasn't coming. Sirens wailed again, louder this time, closer. The neighbor on the phone calmly told the dispatcher that an HOA board member was interfering with residents trying to shelter during an active tornado warning. He used those exact words. Interfering. Active warning. Karen tried to interject, saying she was just enforcing community standards. No one listened. The conversation had moved past her. Authority had shifted from HOA posturing to emergency protocol, and that handoff was irreversible. Within moments, everyone understood something important. HOA rules don't pause emergencies, but emergencies absolutely pause HOA rules. The neighbor who challenged her didn't need legal jargon or fancy language. He just needed common sense and the willingness to say no. That first challenge didn't stop Karen, but it exposed her logic for what it was. When sirens are blaring and the sky looks wrong, nobody cares about bylaws. They care about getting inside alive. And once that line was crossed, the system was already gearing up to shut her down. Karen didn't retreat when challenged, she pivoted. As wind roared louder, she began citing residents for leaving trash bins tipped over and vehicles angled wrong. She said emergencies expose disorder and disorder kills property values. The logic sounded wild, but she wrote fast, snapping photos, acting like the storm was a background inconvenience rather than the main threat outside, tonight anyway despite sirens blaring. The claim escalated things immediately. Neighbors stared as she flagged a pickup parked crooked to avoid branches. Karen said rules don't pause for weather because consistency matters most. Someone laughed nervously. Another cursed under breath. Phones rose. Recording started. Wind shoved rain sideways, rattling signs, and her voice sharpened, louder, bossy, stubborn, while sirens wailed close by again, near houses and trees tonight now. Karen moved faster, scribbling citations for bins, cars, and ladders left mid-project. She argued emergencies don't excuse negligence, doubling down hard. Residents shouted back that safety comes first. A man yelled, "Get inside." She replied, "Values matter." That answer flipped sympathy into anger. Recording continued as gusts intensified and debris skittered across pavement loudly everywhere nearby during the worsening storm. Now right here tonight. The location shifted toward the shelter path, where people queued tightly. Karen followed, still citing, blocking movement with her stance. She claimed order prevents panic. Parents squeezed past, furious. A neighbor told her she was endangering lives. Karen scoffed. Winds boomed. Trees bent. Phones captured everything as urgency overtook politeness. Fast tonight outside everywhere, with sirens echoing nearby again amid rain and thunder now. She escalated by taping notices to doors, ignoring pleas. Karen said disorder lowers prices, repeating the phrase like gospel. That repetition backfired. People filmed closer, narrating timestamps. The storm worsened. Hail pinged. A trash lid flew. Someone screamed. Authority began shifting away from HOA theatrics toward emergency reality as clouds churned violently overhead, with alarms blaring nonstop nearby during this dangerous moment right now. A resident confronted her again, pointing at alerts flashing red. Karen waved them off, citing consistency. That dismissal hardened faces. Someone dialed emergency services quietly. The call changed the math. HOA authority shrank instantly. Real authority queued up. Sirens grew closer. Karen kept writing, unaware the handoff had already begun outside as winds screamed louder over rooftops and streets tonight, with danger rising fast. Police lights appeared through rain, shifting power immediately. An officer ordered everyone inside. Karen started explaining bylaws. He cut her off, saying emergencies override everything. The tone was firm, calm, final. Residents moved fast. The shelter filled. Karen stepped back, soaked, clutching paper, stunned, as thunder cracked and debris skidded nearby across concrete walkways quickly while officers secured access points during the warning period. Emergency protocol took over cleanly. Officers redirected traffic, sealing entrances. Karen protested once, then stopped. The hierarchy was obvious now. HOA rules evaporated. Safety ruled. Recording continued briefly, then phones lowered. The storm raged. The shelter hummed. Control returned, not because of paperwork, but command under flashing lights and pounding rain, with neighbors breathing hard together after chaos ended swiftly during minutes passing fast. Inside, people checked kids, pets, and phones. Outside, Karen faded into background. The escalation cycle completed. HOA theatrics collapsed under emergency law. Someone joked darkly about clipboards versus sirens. No one laughed much. They listened for updates, trusting officials. The shift felt permanent, sobering, necessary as wind battered walls relentlessly and alerts chimed steadily nearby, marking authority finally settled during the warning window tonight. When the worst passed, everyone knew the takeaway. Disasters don't answer to clipboards. HOA power stops instantly when sirens start. Karen learned it publicly, painfully. The neighborhood learned it together. The system worked. Authority arrived fast, spoke once, and resolved it. That clarity saved time, nerves, lives amid chaos, with common sense prevailing over rules, posturing, and ego during storms every time out there. The moment the city emergency alert hit phones, the balance of power shifted hard. Devices buzzed in pockets and hands across the neighborhood with the same unmistakable message, ordering everyone indoors immediately. Not suggested. Not optional. The alert came with that sharp tone that cuts through noise and nerves, the kind people don't ignore. It named the threat, the time frame, and the instruction in plain language. Get inside now. That was the line, and it carried legal weight. Residents reacted instantly. Doors slammed. Garage motors whined. People who'd hesitated a second earlier moved fast, ushering kids and pets into safer rooms. The location changed from open streets to sheltered interiors in real time. Sirens kept wailing, but now they were background to action. The city had spoken, and the neighborhood listened. Then another message landed, this one from HOA management. It wasn't dramatic. It was calm, brief, and crystal clear. Management instructed residents to ignore any non-emergency HOA notices until the warning expired. They reminded everyone that emergency directives override association activity and that no compliance actions were authorized during the event. That text mattered more than Karen realized. It stripped her of cover and made the hierarchy unmistakable. A few neighbors read the message out loud to each other near the shelter entrance, phones glowing in the rain. Someone said, "There it is," like the final piece had snapped into place. The authority chain was now documented. City first. Safety first. Joy last. End of discussion. Karen read both alerts. Everyone saw her read them. She scrolled, frowned, and then shook her head. She said the alerts were recommendations, not rules, and that community standards still needed enforcement to prevent chaos. That sentence landed like a brick. Calling an emergency order a recommendation is how you lose credibility fast. People stared at her, stunned. A neighbor replied that city alerts are enforceable directives. Karen waved it off, saying she'd been around long enough to know when the city overreacts. That dismissal escalated things again because it wasn't ignorance anymore. It was defiance. The wind surged, pushing rain sideways in sheets. A street sign rattled violently. Someone yelled to move faster. Karen stayed put, arguing semantics. She said HOA guidelines were rules and that rules matter most when people are stressed. That logic didn't fly. Stress is exactly why emergency authority exists. Another resident stepped in, holding up the HOA management text. He said calmly that management had just suspended enforcement and that Karen needed to stop. She replied that management didn't understand on-the-ground realities, saying that put her in direct opposition to both city and HOA leadership at once. That's a risky hill to stand on during a storm. The escalation tightened. People started recording again, not for clout, but to capture the refusal to comply with emergency directives. Karen accused them of stirring panic. The accusation bounced. The panic wasn't coming from phones. It was coming from the sky. A patrol car rolled by slowly, lights reflecting off wet pavement. The presence alone changed the room. Authority was no longer abstract. It was visible, tangible, and moving toward enforcement. Karen noticed and grew louder, insisting she was acting responsibly. The irony was thick. An officer stopped, rolled the window down, and shouted for everyone to get inside immediately. He didn't single anyone out. He didn't debate. He repeated the city order and pointed toward shelter. People moved. Karen hesitated, then tried to explain the HOA situation. The officer cut her off and said city orders are mandatory. That was the cleanest definition yet. The HOA management text chimed again, reiterating the pause on notices and instructing residents to prioritize safety. That second ping sealed it. Karen's stance had no institutional backing left. The power shift was complete. She muttered that people would regret ignoring standards. No one responded. The crowd had moved on literally and figuratively. Doors closed. The shelter filled. The neighborhood transitioned fully into emergency mode. Inside, people shared updates and checked maps. Outside, the storm hammered down. Karen stood alone for a moment, rain dripping from her jacket, clipboard limp. The alerts kept buzzing, steady and serious. Recommendations don't come with sirens, cops, and repeat messages. Rules do. The takeaway crystallized right there. When city emergency alerts fire, they define reality. HOA management confirmed it in writing. Karen's dismissal didn't just fail, it highlighted how far outside her lane she drifted. Authority was clearly defined and it wasn't hers. Within minutes, emergency operations had the lead. The debate ended. The system worked. Safety trumped standards, and no amount of HOA slang could argue with a city order delivered loud, legal, and unavoidable. The police response came fast, not the slow crawl Karen seemed to expect. Within moments of the 911 call, emergency management and patrol units were dispatched immediately, their radios crackling with weather updates and location details. Sirens grew louder by the second, weaving through wind and rain as conditions worsened. The storm was tightening its grip, pressure dropping, gusts ripping loose debris across the pavement. Karen stayed planted at the shelter entrance, feet squared, clipboard hugged to her chest like a badge. An officer shouted over the wind for her to move away from the door. She shook her head and said she was maintaining order. That refusal escalated the scene again. The shelter wasn't just a doorway anymore, it was a controlled emergency access point, and blocking it was a big deal. Emergency management arrived with reflective jackets and hard hats, scanning the sky and the crowd. They assessed risk quickly, eyes on cloud rotation, ears on radio traffic. One official told residents inside to stay put while officers cleared the entrance. That instruction shifted control fully to responders. Karen tried to interject, claiming common area authority. The official didn't engage. He told an officer to remove the obstruction. Sirens intensified as another alert blasted across phones, warning of imminent impact. The sound was relentless, a steady wail that made it impossible to ignore reality. Wind slammed the shelter door, rattling hinges. Karen still refused to step aside, saying she'd be blamed later. That excuse didn't land. Accountability during a tornado isn't about paperwork. An officer stepped closer and stated clearly that interfering with emergency response is unlawful. He ordered Karen to leave the entrance immediately. This was the second command, delivered slow and unmistakable. Karen argued that HOA bylaws governed common facilities. The officer replied that city emergency orders supersede all private rules. Period. The location shifted again as responders created a perimeter, using tape and vehicles to keep people clear. The shelter became a protected zone. Karen stood outside that boundary now, soaked and angry, authority evaporating in real time. Emergency management coordinated with dispatch, confirming resources and tracking the storm cell's movement minute by minute. A gust tore through, knocking over a sign. Someone screamed. The officer guided Karen farther back, away from the entrance. She protested loudly, saying this was overkill. The officer warned that continued refusal would result in detention. That consequence was new and immediate. Karen finally hesitated, realizing this wasn't a bluff. Responders prioritized safety checks, counting occupants, securing the door and scanning for injuries. The sirens continued, closer now, echoing off buildings. Karen tried one last time to assert standards. No one responded. The hierarchy was locked. When disaster escalates, authority condenses to those trained to manage it. Minutes later, the storm peaked. Rain hammered down. Emergency management maintained control until the threat passed. Karen remained sidelined, silent at last, clipboard limp. The escalation ended where it should have, with professionals in charge and everyone else out of the way. The takeaway was brutal and clear. During an active tornado warning, refusal isn't debate, it's obstruction. Police and emergency management don't wait, don't negotiate, and don't care about HOA slang. They act fast, shut it down, and keep people alive. That's how real authority shows up when sirens are screaming. Afterward, residents compared notes inside, trading nervous jokes and relief. Someone said, "No kidding, that clipboards lose to tornadoes every time." Another shook their head, calling it wild. The emergency radio crackled with an all-clear timeline. Responders stayed until conditions eased, then began clearing tape and checking streets. Karen drifted away, soaked, stunned, and sidelined, learning the hard truth. During disasters, compliance is immediate, ego gets parked, and the law moves faster than any HOA ever could. That lesson stuck, loud and clear, long after the sirens faded and the neighborhood caught its breath. The moment Karen planted herself in front of the common storm shelter, the situation tipped from absurd into dangerous. Wind screamed down the corridor between buildings, rain slapping sideways, and she stood there with her clipboard like a bouncer nobody asked for. Residents were hustling kids and pets toward the door, faces tight, breathing fast. Karen raised a hand and said shelter access required HOA approval. That sentence landed like a slap, stopping people mid-step while sirens wailed overhead. A father carrying a toddler froze, stunned. He asked if she was serious. Karen nodded and said common facilities are regulated even during emergencies. Her tone was sharp, bossy, and totally disconnected from reality. The wind gusted hard enough to shove the door against its frame. Someone yelled to move. Karen didn't budge. Blocking a shelter isn't a policy debate, it's a safety hazard, and everyone there felt it immediately. Another resident tried to slip past her, and Karen shifted sideways, physically blocking the doorway. That move changed everything. This wasn't talking anymore. It was interference. She claimed she needed to verify residency before allowing entry. That logic collapsed under pressure as lightning flashed close enough to light faces blue. People started shouting. The energy flipped from confusion to anger in seconds. A woman screamed that this was insane. Karen shot back that rules exist for a reason. The reason didn't matter anymore. Wind-driven rain soaked everyone standing outside, and debris skidded across concrete. A loose sign banged against a post. Phones came up again, recording hands shaking, not for drama but proof. This was crossing the line, plain and simple. Someone yelled that they were calling 911. Karen scoffed and said emergency services had bigger things to worry about. That dismissive comment was the worst move yet. A resident already had the phone to their ear, calmly telling the dispatcher that an HOA board member was blocking access to a storm shelter during an active tornado warning. He used those exact words, steady and clear. The escalation jumped levels instantly. Karen heard the call and tried to talk over it, insisting she was preventing chaos. The caller turned his back to her, focusing on the dispatcher. He described the location, the sirens, the shelter, and the obstruction. The dispatcher asked if anyone was in immediate danger. He said yes, people were exposed and unable to enter. That answer flipped the response from routine to urgent. Within moments, police and emergency management were dispatched. Karen still didn't move. She argued that HOA authority applied to common areas and that she'd be blamed if order broke down. No one engaged her anymore. The crowd's focus shifted to getting safe. Parents huddled kids behind them. Neighbors formed a loose line, waiting for authority to arrive. The hierarchy was changing whether Karen liked it or not. A patrol car rolled up fast, lights cutting through rain like a knife. An officer jumped out and shouted for everyone to get inside now. He saw Karen blocking the entrance and told her to step aside immediately. She started explaining bylaws. He cut her off and repeated the order. That was the cleanest authority check yet, delivered without yelling, without debate. Karen hesitated, then protested that she was enforcing standards. The officer said interfering with emergency response is unlawful and ordered her to move. That language mattered. Unlawful beats misguided every time. She finally stepped back, soaked and furious, as residents surged past into the shelter. The door slammed shut behind them, cutting off the wind and noise in one heavy thud. Inside, people exhaled hard, hearts pounding. Outside, the storm raged. The officer stayed with Karen, directing her away from the entrance. Another unit arrived moments later, confirming details. The caller ended the 911 call after confirming responders were on scene. The system had taken over. Karen stood there clutching her clipboard, authority gone, replaced by consequences. Blocking a shelter during a tornado warning isn't a misunderstanding, it's interference. Everyone knew it. The escalation had been swift because it had to be. When sirens are screaming and danger is real, there's no patience for clipboards. The takeaway hit like a gut punch. HOA rules don't guard against wind, debris, or gravity. Emergency response does. Karen crossed the line by turning policy into obstruction, and the moment she did, real authority showed up and shut it down. In a storm, there's no gray area. You either move or you get moved. Emergency officials moved in with purpose, boots splashing through puddles, radios crackling nonstop with updates from dispatch. One of them stepped directly in front of Karen and ordered her to step aside immediately. The command wasn't loud, but it was firm, the kind that doesn't invite commentary. This wasn't a suggestion or a negotiation. It was an instruction backed by flashing lights, weather authority, and the law. Karen hesitated, clearly shocked someone had spoken to her that way. She tightened her grip on the clipboard and asked who exactly was giving the order. That question alone marked another power shift. When someone asks who's in charge during an emergency, they're already behind. The official identified himself as part of city emergency management and repeated the instruction to move away from the shelter entrance now. As rain hammered down harder, another official stepped in, explaining that interfering with emergency response during a tornado warning is unlawful. He used that word carefully, unlawful, not inappropriate or discouraged. He clarified that blocking access to shelter could result in detention or arrest. That explanation wasn't emotional. It was procedural. The law was being laid out clean and simple. Karen scoffed and said HOA bylaws still control common areas, even during storms. Saying that out loud in front of emergency responders was a bold move in the worst way. A few residents inside the shelter gasped. Someone muttered, "She really doesn't get it." The officials didn't react to the scoff. They reacted to the refusal. One emergency officer took a half step closer and explained that city emergency orders supersede all private agreements, including HOAs, leases, and posted policies. He said it slowly, making sure every word landed. The explanation wasn't for Karen alone. It was for everyone watching. This was authority being defined in real time. Karen tried again, saying the HOA could be held liable if standards weren't enforced. That argument collapsed immediately. The official replied that liability during a declared emergency rests with those who interfere, not those who comply. That flipped the script hard. Karen's justification turned into potential exposure. The wind surged, shaking nearby trees. Sirens wailed again, louder and closer, rattling nerves. Phones buzzed with another alert urging immediate shelter. The timing couldn't have been worse for Karen's argument. Reality was undercutting her in real time. The officials didn't raise their voices. They didn't need to. The storm was doing that for them. The lead emergency official issued a final instruction. Step away from the shelter entrance now. This was the second warning, and it came with consequences spelled out. Karen looked around, finally noticing the crowd wasn't on her side. Residents stared back, soaked, tired, scared, and done with the nonsense. No one nodded. No one backed her up. Karen argued one last time that common areas are governed by HOA documents. The official responded that during a tornado warning, common areas are governed by emergency law. He added that continued interference would be treated as obstruction. That word landed heavy. Obstruction isn't a gray area. It's a charge. At that point, the hierarchy locked in. Emergency management took full control of the site. Officers positioned themselves between Karen and the entrance. Another responder radioed that the shelter was clear and secured. The situation moved from debate to enforcement in under a minute, exactly how it's supposed to work. Karen finally stepped back, not because she agreed, but because she understood she was outmatched. The clipboard hung useless at her side, rain smearing ink across the paper. Her authority had evaporated completely, replaced by uniforms, radios, and legal backing. That shift was total and irreversible. Inside the shelter, residents exhaled, some laughing nervously, others shaking their heads. Someone whispered that HOA rules really don't survive sirens. Another said, "That was wild," under their breath. The humor was subtle, born from relief, not cruelty. Emergency officials continued coordinating, checking weather radar and counting occupants. They didn't look at Karen again. She wasn't relevant anymore. Once authority intervenes, distractions fade. The focus returns to safety and outcomes. The lesson was crystal clear for everyone watching. HOA bylaws don't control common areas during disasters. They don't even enter the conversation. When sirens sound and warnings are active, emergency authority overrides everything, instantly and without apology. Karen argued to the very end, but arguments don't beat law and clipboards don't beat storms. The officials shut it down cleanly, professionally, and fast. That's how real authority works when things get real. The resolution unfolded clean and fast once officers made the call. An emergency officer placed himself between Karen and the shelter entrance and told her she needed to leave the area immediately. Not step back a little. Not wait it out. Leave the shelter zone now. His tone was calm but non-negotiable, the kind that makes it clear the discussion is over. Karen opened her mouth to argue, then stopped when another officer gestured her away from the doorway. They escorted her a short distance down the sidewalk, far enough that she couldn't interfere but close enough to keep eyes on her. No cuffs. No drama. Just controlled movement. That shift mattered. The shelter was no longer a contested space. It was secured. Authority had physically changed location, and with that, the risk dropped instantly. Once Karen was removed, officers waved residents forward in quick, efficient motions. Families rushed inside, kids clutching jackets, pets tucked under arms, adrenaline buzzing. The heavy shelter door shut, sealing out the wind and noise. Inside, the air felt thick but safer, like everyone could finally breathe again. Outside, chaos stayed outside where it belonged. An officer remained at the entrance, enforcing a clear perimeter. Another responder checked names off a list, counting heads and confirming no one was missing. Emergency management coordinated over radio, voices steady, professional, no wasted words. The storm didn't pause, but the confusion did. That's what real response looks like. Karen tried to speak again from her new spot, raising her voice about procedure and accountability. An officer looked at her and said flat out that the matter was handled and she needed to remain where she was. That sentence shut it down. No threats. No escalation. Just containment. She crossed her arms, soaked and fuming, clipboard limp and useless. Inside the shelter, residents exchanged looks that mixed relief and disbelief. Someone whispered, "That was nuts," and another replied, "No kidding." The slang was soft, almost affectionate, the kind people use when they've dodged something bad. Phones buzzed with updates showing the storm's path. A few folks checked on neighbors they hadn't seen yet. Community kicked in naturally once the obstruction was gone. Emergency response continued without obstruction. Officers coordinated with weather services, tracking the cell minute by minute. Another unit drove the perimeter, watching for down lines and debris. The system flowed smoothly now, like gears finally meshing. Karen was no longer a factor, which was exactly the point. A responder gave a brief update through the shelter doorway, letting everyone know the warning was still active and they needed to stay put. The message was clear, short, and trusted. Nobody questioned it. After what they'd just witnessed, authority was no longer abstract. It was tangible and earned. Outside, the wind howled harder, slamming rain against walls. The shelter held. Officers adjusted positions. Emergency management relayed radar changes. Every 40 seconds something changed, but now it was the storm, not the situation. Control had been restored. Karen eventually stopped talking. There was nothing left to say. She watched responders work with quiet efficiency, the contrast brutal. Her earlier claims about order looked small next to real coordination. That realization hit hard even if she never admitted it. When the worst passed, responders didn't celebrate. They transitioned. Tape came down. Perimeters relaxed. Officers checked on Karen one last time, reminding her to stay clear while they finished up. She nodded, finally compliant, energy gone. Residents exited the shelter cautiously, blinking at the gray aftermath. Trees leaned. Debris scattered. But everyone was okay. That mattered more than anything. A neighbor clapped an officer on the shoulder and said thanks. Another brought out bottled water. Normal life began creeping back. The aftermath wasn't loud. It was orderly. Exactly how emergencies should end. No citations. No speeches. Just safety restored and lessons learned the hard way. HOA rules hadn't saved anyone. Emergency response had. As people filtered home, someone joked that clipboards don't stop tornadoes. Another said, yeah, nature doesn't care. The humor landed because the danger had passed. It was subtle, earned, and human. The final image stuck with everyone. Responders doing their jobs while one person who tried to control the moment was sidelined. Authority didn't yell. It didn't posture. It acted. And once it did, the neighborhood moved forward together, shaken but safe, knowing exactly who's in charge when sirens start screaming. The consequences didn't wait for the sky to clear. As soon as emergency crews wrapped the immediate response, an incident report was filed documenting interference with emergency operations. It wasn't dramatic or emotional, it was procedural. Times were logged, statements summarized, locations noted. The language was precise and unemotional, which made it heavier. Interference during an active tornado warning isn't a gray area mistake. It's a defined problem with defined outcomes, and the paperwork reflected that reality. Shortly after, officers canvassed the area for brief statements. Residents described being blocked, delayed, and ordered around while sirens were active. One person mentioned being physically prevented from entering the shelter. Another referenced the moment the 911 call was placed. Each account added weight. The power shift was clear. The narrative moved from Karen's claims to documented facts. Once facts take over, opinions stop matching. Within hours, the HOA management company received a formal notice about the incident. It included a summary of events and a reminder about emergency authority superseding private governance. That notice didn't accuse the HOA of wrongdoing, it flagged risk. Management forwarded it to the board with a recommendation to take immediate action. Risk management language tends to get quick results, and this was no exception. That same evening, the HOA board convened an emergency session. No residents present. No public comment. Just board members, management, and council on the line. The decision came fast. Karen was suspended from all HOA duties pending review. Not reassigned. Not cautioned. Suspended. The email went out quietly, phrased in neutral terms about ensuring safety and compliance during emergencies. That phrasing mattered. It framed the issue as governance failure, not personality conflict. Residents found out anyway. Word spread through group chats and door-to-door conversations. Screenshots of alerts and videos circulated, time-stamped and clear. People didn't exaggerate. They didn't need to. The footage showed enough. The collective tone wasn't gleeful. It was disappointed, annoyed, and done. That shift in mood hit harder than outrage ever could. Over the next day, residents submitted written complaints to the HOA. Dozens came in, calm and detailed. People described what they saw, where it happened, and how it affected them. Parents mentioned fear. Seniors mentioned confusion. Several cited the city alert language verbatim. These weren't rants. They were records. Each one chipped away at any remaining credibility Karen had left. The HOA board acknowledged receipt of the complaints and confirmed they'd be included in the review. That confirmation was another power move. It validated residents and boxed in the outcome. When a board commits to reviewing documentation tied to emergency interference, the endgame narrows quickly. Karen tried to defend herself through email, arguing she'd acted to maintain order. The response she received was short. The review would proceed without further commentary until complete. That shut the door on back and forth. Once a process is in motion, emotion doesn't steer it. Meanwhile, emergency management completed their follow-up. The incident report was finalized and archived. No arrest, no citation, just a formal record. That record exists for a reason. It establishes a timeline if anything like this happens again. Consequences don't always come with sirens. Sometimes they come with files that never disappear. Neighbors talked on sidewalks as cleanup began. Someone said, "That was wild," shaking their head. Another replied, "Yeah, but it could have been worse." The slang carried relief, not mockery. People were grateful the system kicked in when it did. By the end of the week, the HOA board issued a notice clarifying emergency procedures and authority boundaries. It didn't name Karen. It didn't need to. The message was clear: during declared emergencies, HOA enforcement stops. Period. That line wasn't up for debate anymore. The final power shift was subtle but permanent. Residents felt heard. Emergency officials were validated. The board protected itself. Karen was sidelined by process, not spectacle. That's how real consequences land, quietly, thoroughly, and without drama. When the storm became a memory, the lesson stuck. You don't argue with sirens. You don't block shelters. And you definitely don't confuse a clipboard with command. The neighborhood moved on, safer and wiser, knowing exactly where authority lives when it matters most. The final outcome arrived with paperwork, not shouting, and that made it hit harder. 2 days after the storm, the HOA sent a formal apology to every resident. The email was plain, carefully worded, and clearly vetted by counsel. It acknowledged confusion during the emergency, stated that enforcement actions had been inappropriate, and clarified that all HOA authority is suspended during declared emergencies. The message didn't hedge. It didn't justify. It corrected. That clarity marked the last power shift. The apology also outlined new emergency protocols. It stated that city, county, and state directives take precedence without exception, that shelter access can never be restricted by the association, and that board members are prohibited from acting independently during warnings. Those rules weren't new laws, they were boundaries finally written down. Seeing them in black and white ended any lingering debate. A follow-up message went out the same afternoon confirming that Karen had been permanently removed from enforcement duties. Not reassigned. Not rotated. Removed. The wording was careful again, citing failure to follow emergency guidance and refusal to defer to officials. It emphasized resident safety and organizational risk. That phrasing matters in HOA land. It means the decision wasn't personal. It was structural. Karen didn't respond publicly. She didn't apologize. She didn't argue. She disappeared from community emails and meetings altogether. Neighbors noticed the absence immediately. The clipboard was gone. The patrol stopped. The tension lifted. It was like someone turned the volume knob down on the whole neighborhood. At the next scheduled HOA meeting, attendance was higher than usual. People wanted to see how things would go now. The board reiterated the emergency authority rules verbally, answered questions, and moved on. No drama. No blame game. Just business. That calm felt earned. Residents talked afterward in small clusters. Someone said, "That was a mess," and another replied, "Yeah, but at least it's fixed." The slang was casual, almost relieved. Nobody wanted to relive the storm. They wanted assurance it wouldn't happen again. They got it. Emergency management sent a brief note to the HOA thanking them for the clarification and reminding them of coordination channels for future events. That message closed the loop. The system had corrected itself and everyone knew where the lines were now. Over the following weeks, the neighborhood settled back into routine. Cleanup finished. Lawns recovered. Storm debris disappeared. The memory lingered, though, as a shared reference point. When the weather app pinged with a watch later that month, someone joked, "Here we go," and another replied, "At least the shelter's unlocked." Laughter followed, light and honest. Karen remained a resident, but her influence was gone. People treated her politely and kept their distance. No one confronted her. No one needed to. Authority had moved on. That's the quiet consequence of overreach. You don't get shouted down, you get sidelined. The board updated the bylaws at the next quarterly review, adding explicit language about emergency deference. It passed unanimously. That vote locked in the lesson institutionally. Future boards wouldn't have to guess. The rulebook finally matched reality. The final takeaway became almost a saying around the place. HOA rules stop when sirens start, not when Karen says so. It wasn't mean. It was factual. It captured exactly what everyone learned without exaggeration. Disasters don't negotiate. They don't care about aesthetics or procedures. They demand immediate compliance with real authority. What made the ending satisfying wasn't punishment. It was alignment. The right people were empowered. The wrong behavior was corrected. Safety took precedence. The community moved forward with clearer expectations and fewer illusions. In the end, no one cheered. No one clapped. The storm passed, the rules were clarified, and life resumed. That's how credible consequences land. Quietly. Completely. And with no confusion left about who's actually in charge when things get real.
Alright, now I want to hear from you. Do you think she was completely out of the line here? Or do you believe authorities sometimes goes too far? Drop your take in comments. I read every single one.